welcome to the Mariah Jean Fit YouTube channel. I'm Coach Mariah. Make sure you like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos as much as possible so we can reach a broader audience. We appreciate your support and enjoy the video. Okay guys, so today we are going to dive into the realm of food myths. Good versus bad foods, and the myths around these very drastic conclusions that people tend to make when it comes to, things like takeaway foods or even packaged foods versus whole foods. And I'm going to tackle this today in a vlog and podcast to finally let you loosen the grip on your perception on what is good and bad, so we can actually start to blur those lines a little bit and give you a bit more flexibility with your food choices. So, are you punishing yourself every time you make some sort of food decision that you think is bad? You're deeming as this terrible thing when you eat chocolate or when you have some chips. Are you punishing yourself with over-exercise? Are you internally punishing yourself and saying that you shouldn't be having that food? Are you having this roll-on effect of really pushing aside what your food wants and needs are and thinking about what I suppose most of common dieting industry is telling that you should not be eating or should be eating? There's a lot of really mixed information out there, and I get it. It's really hard. You're on my platform, you found your way to my podcast, or you found your way to my vlog, you might even be a current client. If you're a current client, you're probably thinking, I've had this conversation with you before, I've had this conversation with my coach before. Usually, if you're quite deep in, to coaching with me, you're probably at a place now where you're able to incorporate these foods quite easily, the ones that you think are bad versus the good foods. But I'm going to tackle this, and I'm going to reassure you that there is no such thing as good or bad foods. There are food types, there are lots of different things contained in foods that sometimes we don't have enough common knowledge about, and that can often confuse us as well. You look on the back of a package and you're like, I don't even understand half of these ingredients. How can I eat this thing? And how can I consume this product if I can't understand all of the ingredients in the packet? And you're probably right. Honestly, there are packaged foods that do contain lots and lots of different ingredients. You're talking preservatives, you're talking artificial sweeteners, flavorings, you're talking binders and the like. There's literally dozens of different names for sugar. And that's probably the first thing I'm going to dive into, is that we seem to demonize sugar and processed sugar in the fitness industry quite a lot as bad. It's just completely bad. How many times have you heard cut out sugar and the no sugar diet and the low sugar diet, and sugar is the devil and sugar causes diabetes and sugar causes this and sugar causes that? Probably decades ago, there was obviously a revelation when it came to the overconsumption of sugar, because they were finding, obviously, with the increase in sugar in the average person's diet, that people were struggling with, increase in risk of obesity, increase in risk of heart disease and cholesterol issues, etc., with people over-consuming even saturated fats. So there's been this relationship that has been established now, probably for majority of the population, that takeaway and packaged foods and specific food groups and types are getting a really bad rap. Things like burgers and things like pizza, etc., are getting a really bad rap for what they are as a food type. So I'm going to clear this up. The reason why we don't want people to consume too much sugar, and there's a recommended daily sugar intake, and this is processed sugar, mind you, this is not from even fructose, etc. That can, fruits can really contribute towards our total sugar intake, sure. But the reason why we are trying to limit processed sugar intake is because in large amounts, and it's actually quite easy to eat large amounts of processed sugar because it's so concentrated. If you look at a teaspoon of sugar and you compare that with a piece of fruit, you're looking at, a really very similar caloric value. And when we talk about caloric value, we're talking about the energy that is contained in that food that it gives us. So we actually measure energy in the units of caloric value, right? So kilojoules and calories, or simply, most people like to use calories because it's quite simple. So you're thinking about this concentrated teaspoon of sugar versus a piece of fruit, and obviously the fruit has a different type of sugar in it, which is going to be fructose, right? So it's processed slightly differently in the body than what we have those, processed sugars as. It's very easy to fit teaspoons and teaspoons and teaspoons of sugar into things like chocolate, things like some ice creams that are very high in sugar, because they've literally added liquid sugar. So not only have they taken the granulated version, but they've then condensed that down into a liquid. And then that's the first ingredient. We know that when you look at the back of a packet, the first ingredient on that packet is going to be what it's predominantly made up of. So when you look at chocolate, let's look at it a little bit in reverse. It's not necessarily always going to be chocolate. It's more like sugar with cocoa bean added to it. And that's because the first ingredient is usually of most, majority of chocolate products is going to be sugar. But we don't want to be having this negative, awful attitude towards sugar just because it's a very concentrated, high calorie item. It's a low volume food, which means that for the calories that is in it, it takes up less room, right? So it's a low volume food. So you might be able to have just over a row of chocolate, something like that, and that's equivalent to the same energy caloric value of a large banana, roughly. But the banana comes with potassium, it comes with fiber, it comes with all the fun things. There's 100 different properties in a banana, fantastic pre-workout, and it is processed slightly differently in that it has to go through a bit of a more rigorous process to get through the body. So it has got added benefits to it. But if you were to eat the row of chocolate versus the banana, it's still going to give you a very similar calorie intake for those two items. The major differences are going to be what's contained in them from a micronutrient level. And micronutrients are fantastic for us. Honestly, it is great getting micronutrients. We're looking at the whole rainbow of micronutrients and even things like essential amino acids contained in our lean proteins. But micronutrients are the tiny little nutrients, and hence the name micro, that assist with our bodily function, our metabolism in some aspects, but in things like our general health and our immunity and our brain function, and the list goes on. It's on a very concentrated level that micronutrients are very beneficial for us and can help us with lots of things like production of serotonin, the happy hormone released to keep as a mood stabilizer. So these micronutrients are, yes, important in whole foods. This is what I'm trying to get at. Yes, they're important. Yes, we need to eat the whole foods, 100%. We want to have broccoli and beans and zucchini and all of the really enriched foods that have quite a dense nutrient profile. But we don't want to cut out sugar altogether. The reduction of sugar intake is recommended for those who are consuming processed sugar any higher than 10% of their total daily calorie intake, in total, right? So it's 10% of their total calorie intake of processed sugar. We want to try and go under that, and between 5 and 10% would be reasonable. So, but obviously most of the majority of the population, since checking these types of figures out, they're eating a little bit over that. And especially with what people are struggling with is they're not just overeating sugar, but they're also overeating saturated fats. Now, this is the next point I'll get to. Saturated fats, of all the groups of different fats that we consume, are possibly the worst ones for us. And of our total fat intake for the day, so that macronutrient in general, fats are contained in avocado, nuts, you're seeing in olive oil, there are fats in peanut butter, there are fats in some spreads and things like that we eat as well. But there's also some very processed fats, which are your saturated fats. And these kind of came about in the time of when takeaway became a massive thing. So the launch in the era of McDonald's and being able to preserve foods and make them taste just that little bit better. So saturated fats, the reason why we don't want to consume a large amount of saturated fats is because, number one, they aren't processed very well by the body. Right? Our body doesn't particularly like them, and they are more likely to be stored on your organs as hard visceral fat. And even fat stores on the body, hard visceral fat. So ladies, if you're looking at a way to reduce cellulite, if you can possibly look at, maybe the quality of the consumption of fats you're eating will even change things like the consistency, yes, of your skin quality, because sometimes also the overconsumption of saturated fats are going to cause some gut health issues too. So when we talk about gut health, it really just comes down to there's very simple things that we're putting in our body, maybe in excess. How do we identify whether or not we're over-consuming our processed sugar or our saturated fats? Well, you can track your food intake with a normal tracking diary. Usually, with any app, MyFitnessPal is one of the most popular ones, but you can actually see in your nutrients panel whether you're over-consuming your saturated fats if you're using reliable entries, or whether you're over-consuming your sugar. Sugar is not as much of a concern if you are training in the gym 5 to 6 times a week, right? If your training intensity is quite high as well, like mine is, your sugar intake can probably go over. And one of the major reasons for this is because you're going to be using the fuel that you're giving your body. So it's not necessarily that we don't want you eating sugar altogether. It really is relative to your calorie intake. Now, this means that in the big scheme of things, honestly, if you want to stick to your total calories and your energy value for the day and keep yourself in a deficit, you could just eat chocolate for the day and eat nothing else. But the problem with that is that you're not getting any micronutrients, you're not getting any sort of protein, which means you're probably not going to build any sort of nice lean muscle and get that nice toned look that you see. And you're probably going to run out of gas pretty quickly. And that's because the energy from chocolate is released very quickly. It's something that is great for before a workout. If you want to have something that is great for before a workout, yeah, have some chocolate for sure, absolutely. But if we track and we monitor the intake of our total calories and our total sugar intake, and we look at what that is relative to how much exercise we're doing as well, if we are doing large amounts of exercise, we're burning lots of energy, we're not really stacking on tons of body fat, we're maintaining like I am at the moment, maintaining our physique fairly well, we shouldn't worry too much about our sugar intake as long as you're still meeting the minimum requirement for your 3 to 5 serves of veg and your 2 to 3 serves of fruit, and you're having those 2 to 3 serves of whole grains and the like daily, so that you've got that variety, so that you've got normal structured meals, so that breakfast is a normal structured meal. It's not half a block of chocolate, and we don't overthink this. And then lunch might be a normal structured meal with some veggies and some lean protein, and even as well, not demonizing bread, just knowing that that has an energy value to it. And then dinner, same thing, right? So having that structure where you probably can incorporate some of these simple sugars, is now called something else. Actually, it's not called simple sugars anymore, but it's kind of been called simple sugars for quite a while in the fitness and nutrition industry. But where we can literally implement things like bits of chocolate here and there. You could have some rice cakes with Nutella on them. And this is not me giving you individual nutrition advice, but this is me telling you that you can eat Nutella. You can eat these foods. You can have, and you should be having, the foods you love and enjoy. It's just the amounts that we're looking at from a perspective of bang for your buck for energy value, keeping you fuller for longer, because obviously if you're more inclined to overeat, binge eat, and snack constantly, then sugary foods that aren't going to fill you up probably aren't a very good choice to choose over and over and over again in a day, because you're just going to kind of be like feeling like you haven't got what's called satiety, so you don't have much satisfaction from your food. But if you focus on those bare basics of breakfast, lunch and dinner, and your snacks, you can mix them up a little bit and get a little bit fun with those, you'll find that you can actually find that balance pretty easily, and that you can incorporate some of those things that you enjoy eating, as long as you're within your caloric intake for what your goal is. If you're wanting to lose body fat, you're in a deficit, a calorie deficit. If you're wanting to maintain where you are, which was what I'm currently doing at the moment, then you want to eat maintenance calories. And then if you're wanting to be in a surplus, that might be where you might have to incorporate some more of those sugars and those carbohydrates that are quick release, because you've got the goal to grow, obviously. So if you're in a surplus, you're wanting to grow, you're wanting to put weight on, you're wanting to put muscle on. And we know from a sports nutrition perspective, eating more carbohydrates is much harder when you're in a surplus, because obviously your body doesn't want to, or is telling you you're full, right? So all of those whole foods that you're eating, the rice, the bread, the things that are quite filling, are going to be difficult to eat in large amounts, and it's going to cause you digestional upset. So when we want to eat more food, when we're in that surplus, when we're trying to grow a little bit more muscle, it actually makes more sense to incorporate more of those things, like a little bit of chocolate, some lollies here and there. Not eating an entire packet in one sitting, because there is that balance. So I always refer back to the 80-20 rule when it comes to whole food and fun food. I call it a whole food, fun food balance, and it's 80% whole food, 20% fun food. That usually sits fairly well within the recommended daily intake and can go a little bit over with your sugar if you are training at athletic levels, which is understandable. Also, we need to match that with our salt intake as well. As athletes and people, you're considered athletic level training. If you're training, 5 to 6 times a week, that's quite frequent. And if the training sessions are 45 minutes, an hour long, that's athletic level training. So coming back to the whole sugar intake thing, people are confusing whole foods with fat loss foods. And they are specifically saying, I do find this a lot with clients, and also just in general, the fitness and nutrition community. You see this with people who are undergoing new diets, and it's cut out this and don't have this and never have this again, and only eat whole foods. If you really think about it though, what do you do when you finish the diet, right? Do you go back to the way that you were before, or do you just never eat chocolate again? Or you just never eat chips again? Or you just never eat this random food that you decided that is no longer allowed to be consumed ever again? No, you don't. That's not sustainable, okay? I've eaten a burger in the last week. I'm not a genetic anomaly. Burgers are actually wonderful for, the nutrients they provide, macronutrients for sure, carbohydrates, protein, fats. Do they come with some saturated fats? Sometimes yes. Do we need to keep an eye on how often we're having burgers? Probably. But you don't have to beat yourself up for doing that. That's not a part of something that's sustainable long-term. Can you say to yourself, I've cut out chocolate, I'm never gonna eat chocolate again? Probably not. And if you don't like chocolate, that's fine. But there's probably some sort of food that you feel guilty for eating because you think it's a bad food. What if I was to tell you that you could eat that food in a moderate amount every day for the rest of your life and still be able to adhere to the calorie intake that you're wanting to consume and that you need to consume depending on your goals, and enjoy your life? You can still enjoy your life, and you can still continue on with your goals, and you can still incorporate that. I eat a little bit of chocolate every day. This is something that I tackled coming back from my eating disorder. I recovered from eating disorder between the ages of 20 and 23. And one of my trigger foods was chocolate. I was so obsessed with health foods. I thought that I had to eat healthy foods, clean foods, in order to lose body fat and keep the body fat off, to the point where I actually established a fear around food, takeaway foods, anything that was packaged. It was like the most plain, most, actually it was really boring, my diet, and I didn't actually enjoy it that much. I felt pretty good, but I feel just as good now running the 80-20, running the 80% whole food, 20% fun food, and I don't feel guilty anymore. I don't feel guilty having a little bit of chocolate every day, and I actually plan it into my day. It's not something I snack on from the cupboard. It is something that is allocated that I have as a snack, and I sit down and I enjoy it and I'm mindful about it so that it doesn't become this guilt food that I'm eating sneakily. I'm eating it very overtly, very obviously, and very happily and very publicly, and I'm sitting and I'm being mindful about it so that I don't have this shit relationship with food where I demonize certain food groups, good or bad. And you might be saying to me, Mariah, I just know myself. I can't control myself around a packet of cookies. How are you ever going to be able to control yourself around a packet of cookies unless you learn how to have a cookie a day, and to incorporate that into your goals? And if you can't fit the foods in that you absolutely love while you're in a deficit, I'm going to tell you this: deficits don't usually go for that long unless you're competing or doing something extreme. So you might be going 5 to 6 months, worst case scenario, without fitting that really fun food into your calories, but you'll have it back once you've finished that journey, once you've hit that goal. And it's okay to put it back in, because when you increase your calories again, you'll be able to fit that back in again. You don't need to keep beating yourself up for consuming moderate amounts of the foods that you love. So by demonizing these food groups, what we're basically doing is we're creating this deprivation on one side, right? So it's kind of like we're taking away the fun thing that we know that we enjoyed. And whatever happens to you when you take something away that you love and you enjoy for a prolonged period of time, and what happens if I was to tell you that there wasn't really any sort of plausible reason to do that? You know, you're going to react eventually. Eventually you're going to crack. Eventually it's going to create a little bit of a cycle in your head where you've got the deprivation and all you want is that. And that's where you start that cycle of deprivation, binge, deprivation, binge, deprivation, binge. If you just allowed yourself to have that small amount daily, you actually have a better chance at breaking that deprivation binge cycle, because this is no longer something that is overly desirable and out of reach. It is something that is right there in your palm. You've got it. You don't need to worry about never being able to have it again, because it's there every day and you can look forward to it the next day. That's one of my biggest tips for my clients is the food will always be there. And this is often what happens with these good and bad food relationships, is that if you demonize a food group and say that is all bad and I'm never having it again, you then are worrying about this idea that you will never have it again. And so then when you do have it, you feel like eating it all at once. It's like, oh, I haven't had this in months. I'm going to eat the whole block because what happens if I can't have it again? It's that self-sabotage thing from the podcast I did on self-sabotage. It actually ties back into it. So it creates this relationship, this shitty relationship with food. And somewhere along the lines, this obviously happened in our developmental stages, not early developmental, but maybe in our teen years when we were introduced to the dieting world and where people started cutting out food groups. Because sometimes cutting out an entire food group for people to think about is much easier than tracking your calories. It's much easier than being mindful of your intake. It's much easier than trying to comprehend and understand that it ain't about it. It's not about, cutting these food groups out and having good or bad food groups. It's actually about finding a balance and finding a balance that works for your goals. So another thing to keep in mind is if you ever heard this information to cut out food groups, to cut out chocolate, cut out potato, cut out carbs, cut out fats, cut out, I don't know, honestly, there's been every type of diet under the sun that we know of. If you've heard this information, has it come from a reliable source? And when I say that, has it come from a dietitian or a nutritionist? Pretty much, those are the only two people, and I'm going to say this with conviction, who can give you this information and advice. Because outside of that, people who work in the medical field, and I'm saying this very overtly, but people who are not specialists in nutrition don't specialize in nutrition. They specialize in other areas. General practitioners is general health, and pharmaceuticals is pharmaceuticals, and endocrinologists is hormones, and podiatrists is feet. Why would you go to a podiatrist and ask them for nutrition advice? Personal trainers that do not have nutrition qualifications, and I will say this again, and this is probably going to rub some people up the wrong way, a personal trainer who does not have a nutrition or dietetic qualification, and I'm talking a qualification where they're registered and insured to practice with clients, not just a serial packet, oh yep, I got this certificate, it doesn't actually allow me to do anything legally, but it's this cool course I did. Unless they are registered and insured on a board of nutritionists or dietitians in Australia or in the country that you live in or globally, wonderfully our qualifications are recognized globally. Unless they are, you cannot take anything they say about nutrition seriously, no matter how much they say they've done their own studies, no matter how much they say that they've looked at all the case studies in the world, no matter how much they say that I know about gut health and I know about processed sugars and I just know. That's a red flag. There are people like me, there are plenty of sports nutritionists and dietitians out there for you to access. If you want really good quality nutrition advice, go to a qualified dietitian and actually ask for their qualifications. Say, look, where are you qualified? Really make sure that they've got good references as well. If you are looking at a challenge on the internet and you don't know, if there isn't anything in fine print about being written by a qualified dietitian and registered dietitian, if there's nothing there about it, it is literally like getting someone who does let's say you're getting a builder in to do your electricals. It doesn't actually make any sense. They don't do electrical work, they're a builder. So make sure you get the advice from a qualified nutritionist, dietitian. This is not saying come to me, you've got to come to me. There are literally hundreds of thousands of dietitians and nutritionists in the world that you can access and that you can talk to, and that we are often providing this information for free. And you often need to be open to listening to it. Okay, cool. More than one dietitian and nutritionist has said there's no such thing as good and bad foods. So I'm a professional telling you, you can eat some sugar. You can eat carbohydrates, okay? Nobody is exempt from this. There are going to be some specific health conditions, if you do have one, where, and especially specifically diabetes, PCOS, you're looking at chronic conditions, right? Very specific thyroid issues sometimes as well, and the like, that are going to be affected more by, more calories, basically, okay? So, and also some food types will disrupt their gut health as well, more so than what the average person does without these chronic conditions and illnesses. For the most part, not a single person, unless you've been diagnosed with a sugar allergy, or that you've got some sort of hyperactive reaction or something like that, or even with diabetes, exactly with that situation, is that yes, you need to be mindful of your sugars for sure. But most of the population can consume sugar to a certain extent and remain in a calorie deficit for fat loss, remain in maintenance for their general composition, keeping the composition the way it is, or go into a surplus and maybe feel a little bit more of that to try and fuel those heavier workouts. I'm telling you as a professional, you can eat a little bit of sugar. You can have a little bit of saturated fats as well. It's not going to kill you, and it tastes delicious. It tastes delicious. I eat cereal every day. Cereal is a staple of mine because it's very easy to eat, and of course it contains some sugar. And there was a day and a time years ago, 10 years ago, before I did all of my education, where I was in the same boat, where I thought cereal was obviously the devil because there was a lot of misinformation out there about it. And there's actually more products that have lots of high levels of sugar in them that you don't realize, like juices. Juices are a health food product that people will say, is it healthy? That actually have, sometimes higher sugar intake than what a chocolate bar does. And they're not putting that on the front of it. They're not going, this juice is deliciously juicy and, naughty, like it's a juice. People think it's really healthy. It's healthy, I'm drinking a juice. But some of those juices have up to 6-7 oranges in them. And so would you sit there and eat 7 oranges in a sitting? Probably not. But they're marketed to you as healthy, but they're really high in sugar. So we don't have to be scared of sugar. Being mindful of it is probably a better way to look at things, and look at what's reasonable for your intake. Turn the label around. Have a look at what you're eating. Don't put fear into yourself, and let yourself have those fun foods. Get that better relationship with food by thinking about it differently. So obviously, finally, I'm going to finish up with a couple of other points. One of them being that, having sugar before a workout or some sort of carbohydrates, quick release carbohydrates, can actually be very beneficial for fat burning reasons. So there's something called the Krebs cycle, and this is a very complicated biochemical process. But the short version of it is that when we're in a calorie deficit for the day, and we consume, even so, when we're not in a calorie deficit, it can actually happen while we are, exercising. But when we consume carbohydrates closely before our training, specifically it's a 1 to 3 hour window. You can do half an hour before your training for a real boost if it's quick release. And I mean quick release, like lollies, a couple of lollies, a little bit of chocolate here and there. It's actually really beneficial because it can actually kickstart this Krebs cycle if you don't already have carbohydrates in your tummy from earlier in the day. And this Krebs cycle actually helps out with fat burning. So the process is very complicated, but basically carbohydrates and fats end up being burnt together in some aspect, and it actually carries it around as energy and uses the body fat with the carbohydrates present in high heart rate zones specifically. So you're looking at those heavier lifts, weight training, you're looking at, running, for example. This is why a lot of runners carry those little gels on them. It's just sugar. It's just sugar in a little pod. And it's also what's in Powerade and Gatorade. So Gatorade and Powerade is advertised as a sports supplement drink. It is a sports supplement drink which contains electrolytes, which are very essential for human function and for hydration. And hydration is very essential for literally every process that occurs in your body, including brain function, including performance. But Powerades and Gatorades have sugar in them. The full sugar versions have sugar in them. And electrolytes like salt and potassium, sometimes calcium as well. Sugar, they have sugar in them. But they're advertised to us as a sports drink. But there could be just as much sugar in a Powerade as there is in a juice. It just doesn't have as many electrolytes in the juice. It may only have sodium sometimes in some cases. This is why clever marketing has gotten into your brain over the last few decades, and you've got to learn to see past the label and learn what's actually on the back of the label, because that's where the good stuff is. That's where the information is, the real information. And using this guideline, this 80-20, the whole foods, fun foods, start to incorporate these changes in your life, remove the guilt, do it slowly if you need to. It's life-changing. And no one gives a shit. No one gives a shit if you're eating whole foods all day long. No one cares. No one thinks you're a hero because you eat nothing but chicken and broccoli. That doesn't make you special. You can achieve the same results that you're achieving on chicken and broccoli with chicken, broccoli, some soy sauce, some rice, and and incorporating some chockies here and there, and maybe some rice cakes with Nutella or a sandwich if you eat bread. Because and most people should be able to eat bread unless you have an intolerance or you have an allergy to gluten and wheat. You've been tested for it. It is, again, one of those foods people seem to demonize. Bread is bad. Bread is not bad. If you eat a whole loaf of bread, of course it's going to upset your stomach, because that's a lot of bread to eat in one sitting. And the fiber types in these foods as well. Sometimes there's too much insoluble fiber, sometimes there's too much soluble fiber, sometimes there's not enough fiber, and sometimes literally your stomach just doesn't like too much of one food type, and that's okay. It's okay for your stomach to go, hey, you gave me lots of that today. If you ate 10 bananas or 15 bananas in a day, it's probably going to upset your gut health. You're going to get to a point where your stomach and your digestive system and your body says, hey, I don't like that much. I want a little bit of something else. That's why we want food variety. So that's my other tip, is don't demonize food groups. Have small amounts of each food group that you're enjoying. And my thing too is that I'm not going to eat bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and a snack if I know that, okay, that much bread really upsets my tummy. It's not a bad food. It's not a fat gain food. It's not a fat gain food at all. It's just making me feel bloated, and I'm obviously over consuming that food type. Okay, so finally, to finish up, the day that you realize that there are no good or bad foods, there are just foods that serve different purposes and in different amounts can do different things for your body. There is a calorie deficit, there is a calorie maintenance, and there is a calorie surplus range, and these can differ a little bit too, depending on lots of different factors. It's very different for the individual person, but you cannot demonize food groups as, fat loss foods or non-fat loss foods or good or bad foods. They are just foods, and they contain different things and they do different things, but the energy value that they contain overall for the day of what you're consuming is going to dictate your fat loss or gain the most of any of the factors that you're looking at in the way of food types. It's actually the amount of calories that you're eating daily that matters the most. So that's about it from me for today's podcast and vlog. I know it's a long one, guys, but if you have any questions at all, feel free to swing us a message on any of our social media platforms, and we'll get back to you. If you want to sign up for coaching, make sure you check out our website. Currently, I don't have any spaces available one-on-one coaching for me, but I do with the coach that I have hired, Coach Alora. So if you are looking to make a change and start to incorporate some of these fun foods into your life and get some of those goals that you're after, make sure that you give us a little check out and have a look at our details. Even if you just want to follow the rest of our social media channels, it is really nice to have the support and to be able to help larger groups of people. It does help with exposure if you share, like, subscribe, and give us a rating on our podcast as well. Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.